we must talk about Grenfell first, of course, because the report was published yesterday. It said the 2017 fire was the result of decades of failure by successive governments and systematic dishonesty by cladding firms. It's a brutal old report, 1,700 pages long, blames incompetence, dishonesty and greed by organisations including the fire service, including the building's landlord and the local council for the disaster.
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants.
We'll break down the key findings in more detail later, but the anger over the disaster is on the front pages. Of course, there's a rather beautiful headline here, the Evening Standard in London, which just shows the tower, all 72 deaths avoidable, lots of people with the 72. Telling, isn't it, that some people, we still haven't got photographs of some of the ones who died. The Sun wants people in the dock, the Mail saying the same. And now, of course, the issue is, when do the police actually take action? Because they say criminal charges, including manslaughter, may happen, but nothing will be brought until the end of 2026 because they've got such a huge investigation going on. Survivors and bereaved families said that means justice is still not being delivered.
Human life was never a priority, and we lost friends, neighbours and loved ones in the most horrific way through greed, corruption, incompetence and negligence. We will never give up fighting for justice for you, and you will forever be in our hearts.
Following the report, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer issued an apology on behalf of the state, saying the tragedy should never have happened and promised swift repercussions.
7 years still waiting for the justice that you deserve. I want to say very clearly on behalf of the country, you've been let down so badly before, during and in the aftermath of this tragedy. Today is a long-awaited day of truth, but it must now lead to a day of justice.
So the question is, will the Grenfell community ever get justice? Our lines are open now. Do tell us what you think, what you want to happen next. 0207 862 2222. I'm just thinking, Gemma, we won't probably see any criminal court action until 10 years after it happened.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that absolutely extraordinary? And I think the Eye sort of said how I feel. It's like they were let down, these people, by everybody around them. And you do wonder whether it had been a luxury, wealthy apartment block, whether things would have moved more quickly. The report is so damning. Regulatory incompetence, corruption. The fire service had been cut as well. That cladding on the outside of the buildings, anybody who knew that that was flammable like that, it is criminal. I don't think any of us will forget the day that we saw that inferno happen and the fact that we are so far down the line. And some people, I believe, are still not housed permanently.
Well, I'm also thinking, Robert, you've talked a lot about people with disabilities like yourself, and of course they were uniquely vulnerable in that high rise.
Yeah, the whole thing is incredibly grim, and just watching it all on the TV yesterday, it just brings it back.
Yeah.
It was so horrific at the time, and there has been, whichever way you look, there's been a failure of everyone, whether it's governments, the government I was previously part of, whether it's previous governments, the fire service, the local authorities, the businesses. Shocking what has gone on. The architects, the fire service, the regulators, whichever way you look. And it isn't just this is the tragedy. We've had the post office scandal. And I think, yes, absolutely, we need to look at this, but we need to look at why are these terrible things happening. Contaminated blood scandal as well. And there's a failure of every single institution, one after the other.
Well, we seem to be very good at buck passing in this country. Now, with the post office scandal, the difference is everyone can picture Paula Venables. It's all going, everything, all roads lead to Paula.
Yeah.
With this, there's so many, it's a network of failure. And it may be a good thing that we haven't got one particular hate figure here, because that wouldn't represent what happened. Everybody failed.
Yes,
although with the post office, you've got the computer company and the IT and the lawyers and so on. But I accept what you're saying. But this way, it's every single way you look, and the buck passing, no one takes responsibility.
No, well,
for it,
that's the issue. Nobody, no, I don't know, you sort of wish somebody had said, look, this is on me. But no one will ever say that.
No, because I think it is a blend of things that let these people down. But however, what I will say is nobody has more power than the government after an event to then hold people to account and to investigate and to do due diligence. And I'll never forget really distasteful things like Jacob Rees-Mogg saying that, they should have used their common sense, which was disgusting, talking about the people trapped in the building.
I was not going to mention that
advised.
Because it was so offensive.
Or Lord Pickles at the inquiry, the big old bloated man saying, I've got to get to a lunch. And it was like, really? This is the people who've lost their loved ones have been campaigning for so long. Johnson, when he was mayor, was obviously way before Grenfell, was being questioned about why he'd cut 65 million quid of the fire service, and he told them to get stuffed. And that kind of attitude has not helped.
OK, after the break, let's take some calls on this, because I wonder whether you think there ever will be anyone in the dock for Grenfell. And what do you want to see happen? Criminal charges for cladding bosses? How should ministers who ignored warnings be punished? 0207 862 2222. We wouldn't do quiz questions in this bit of the show because we're talking about Grenfell and it's so serious. We'll talk about primary school meals later, but let's have some calls on whether there will ever be justice for the Grenfell victims and their families. It'll be 10 years minimum before anyone gets convicted if they do. 0207 862 2222 is the number. Survivors and families of the 72 who died in the disaster have shared their anger over delayed justice for their loved ones. Among them, Marcio Gomez. His unborn son Logan was the youngest victim of the tragedy and was stillborn in hospital after Marcio, his wife and their 2 daughters escaped the blaze. He spoke to Dan Walker on 5 News about his loss.
Of all the burdens that you carry around with you, is that the heaviest?
Yes. Yeah, 100%, that's my failure.
You don't blame yourself for that, do you?
Yeah.
How can you blame yourself when you did everything? You saved the lives of your family and your friends.
Yeah, not all of them. Of course, justice hasn't come through yet. What justice will look like, I don't know just yet. I know what I'd like to see. The individuals being held accountable for it. The corporations that knew exactly what they were doing with the cladding and everything else, then the materials that they were using, doing all the cutbacks and all those brown envelope moments that they had, they need to be held accountable. And I need to see some people do time.
Marcio Gomez, they painted a heart on the hoarding above the building after the fire, and it's a reminder that it was 72 people who lost their lives in the fire. We don't have pictures for some of them, as I mentioned earlier, but they are, of course, at the centre of all this. Let's look at the general findings of the report. Successive governments, the judge said, missed many opportunities to identify the risk. By 2016, the government was well aware, failed to act. Deregulation drive meant safety matters were ignored, delayed or disregarded, and there was then systematic dishonesty by some of the firms involved. I know this is a very troubling image here of the actual fire, so let's just cover that. Arconic, one of the firms. So they were actually building the cladding that went outside. They deliberately concealed the danger of the cladding. That's what the judge decided. So they didn't tell people that it was failing fire safety tests. Then we have the sales and the insulation. Now, Celotex were putting material between the cladding and the outer wall of the building. They supplied insulation and embarked on a scheme to mislead their customers, which in this context is tremendously serious. Third firm for you, called Kingspan here. And Kingspan, again, were in sales and manufacture. They continued to sell insulation despite their product failing fire safety tests disastrously. So you have 3 people who are in the free market there, if you like, outside government, who let everybody down. But let's go back now into government, council, etc. Firstly, Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, who you can imagine might lose the word royal over this, the way they behaved, disgraceful. And the tenant management organisation in the borough, persistent indifference to fire safety by the council and the tower's landlords, seeing it all as a bit of an inconvenience. So that's the outcome of the investigation into them. But then the government is mentioned as well. The government guidance on fire tests was fundamentally defective. Government and the council response left residents feeling abandoned and utterly helpless. So you'll remember that residents started to say, we're worried about this block. We're worried it might be a fire risk, and no one would really listen to them. And then we must mention one other group as well, and that's the fire service, because they had a policy, what was called stay put, which was that you're supposed to stay in the flat while the fire is burning, which was a disaster. London Fire Brigade had no effective response and a chronic lack of effective management and leadership. That's a summary. London Fire Brigade Commissioner Andy Rowe said the service is not complacent, and there are a few other replies to the report that we can go through. But in the end, this report is the final word, Robert, isn't it?
It is the final word. And as you can see, whichever way you look, there has been a failure. I worry that some of the businesses that you mentioned, some of the people who run it seem to live overseas.
Yeah, well, I think it's odd. Arconic have come back and said, we did not conceal information or mislead. Celotex say they've reviewed and improved the marketing of their products. Kingspan say, yes, there were wholly unacceptable historic failings. I don't know. I don't think it's appropriate for them to be making these comments after this long inquiry.
Sort of ridiculous corporate nothing, I agree. Yeah. And what's really frightening is I believe, and I could be wrong, but I was looking today, 4,500 buildings still have this type of cladding on them.
Well, that's another thing.
Now, that is something that should have been just dealt with instantly, in my mind, like as a massive priority. The people living in those buildings must live in fear.
Some of them are privately owned. Yeah. I mean, this becomes another issue. Does the government pay for cladding on a privately owned block of flats?
It's not easy. And also you have a problem with where you don't own the lease. Yeah. So the crazy system that we have, that's one thing that we should get rid of, is this business where you have a flat and then somebody owns the lease of the flat. So who's actually responsible for dealing with it? But there have been one or two things that I think progress, because there's been building legislation, there's been fire safety legislation and regulations to protect social tenants. A little bit of progress has been made, but they've got to go after these guys and these awful corporate statements that you mentioned. It is, I'm a Conservative, but this is the kind of so-called vulture capitalism that I absolutely hate, and it damages what I believe in. And to me, if I was a Conservative leader, I would be running for Conservative leader at the moment, I would be making a speech on this and accepting responsibility from our government when we were in power and previous governments, but also to say what they would do to stop this sort of thing happening again, because this is what the public want. I would rather that a Conservative leadership candidate dealt with this rather than go on about the reform vote or whatever it may be, because this issue reflects everything. There's so many fundamental wrongs in our society.
Yeah.
Well, it's if you know London, you'll know that Kensington has got the most expensive houses in the country, maybe even the world in it. 40, 50 million, some of them. And it's a borough where you have got massive concentrations of wealth. And the council, I think, just doesn't really have a feel for what you might call the other, the people who are not like them. But also, and they just let them swing here.
It's a tale of two cities. It's the best of times and worst of times.
Totally.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and the sense of community within the park around Grenfell, which really showed the sense of togetherness, the sense of the people that came together around Ladbroke Grove. And interesting, what you've got in Kensington as well is empty mansions. Often they're owned by the Chinese or the Russians, and actually that's interesting as well. And I just want to say about the firefighters, yes, there were failings, but there was footage of them approaching the thing and they'd never seen anything like it.
No, I know. And also
the people that went in to that building, bravest people ever.
I know, and you feel so sorry for individual firemen and firewomen who were told to tell everyone to stay put, and then they get the blame afterwards for saying, let's take some calls on this. Christine in Hampshire, we're all heartbroken again over this.
Yes, we are, Jeremy. Sorry, you're probably going to think that I'm very naive. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, we're listening to you. Yeah.
Yes, I'm probably very naive, I am. But there used to be a public information film that we used to get on telly, didn't we? Fire, if you don't let it start, you won't have to stop it. Now, this fire was caused, apparently, by a fridge in a man's flat.
Right.
To me, there hasn't been enough looking into that. What make was the fridge? I mean, how many fridges do you know that have ever caught fire?
There actually has been an enormous amount of forensic work on the fridge, yeah. And
so why isn't that company, whoever the maker of the fridge was?
Well, I mean, it's all catalogued, I promise. And sometimes white goods catch fire. I mean, I talked to somebody. I was going to say the other day, right? A parent of somebody at my daughter's school, and I said, "How are you?" I hadn't seen her for a while. She said, "I've had a terrible time. My house caught fire." I said, "What happened?" She said, "It started in the wall." She said, because there's a wiring under the plaster. Yes. How do you deal with that? Sometimes fires will start, Christine. You can't blame the guy who owned the fridge.
Well, I think you can, or the fridge maker anyway. I mean, I've never known a fridge catch fire. They had the tumble dryer thingy, but no, more needs to look into that. And obviously, if there'd have been sprinklers in the flats, that would have helped.
Yeah, so, true. And you grew up looking at Grenfell, did you?
Sorry, my love?
Did you grow up looking at Grenfell?
Well, I'm 80 now, so I've never seen a fridge catch fire. I'm
sorry. All right, next caller did. Thank you, Christine. Justine in Suffolk, my misunderstanding. You grew up looking at Grenfell?
Yes, hello?
Go ahead, Justin.
Hello? Yes, my grandparents' flat was actually in southwest London. I grew up originally in southwest London, in Putney, and it's such a large, the block of flats was only small, but on top of a hill. But Grenfell Tower and Trellick Tower behind it was so large you could see it right across West London. And the last time I saw it, they put the cladding up, and you could see the change. And that meant that much loss of life. The last time that many people died was in the Blitz, and that was an act of war.
I know, so, and the cladding appears... I mean, it seems like the cladding was put up just to make it look a bit prettier.
Yeah, for the sort of rich neighbours, so it looked like an eyesore.
It is, as Robert said, Justin, it's a tale of two cities, this, isn't it? It's rich and poor side by side.
And then you've got these people that are earning this amount of money.
Well, thank you for your call. After the break, we're taking more calls on whether you think the Grenfell victims will ever get justice. 0207 862 2222. Let's have more calls, though, on Grenfell and whether you think this will ever get into a criminal trial and you'll see people brought to justice. 0207 862 2222. Pete is in Lincolnshire. Pete, what do you think?
I don't think there ever will be. Personally, because if me, Pete and company owned that building, no matter who I used for the cladding, the windows, etc., I and my company would have been undrawn and gone. But because it's government and council, they're all blaming everybody else. Well, it was because this company did that, and because they did this, and because they did that. And nobody will be specifically a certain person or company will get done for it.
Well, the closest we can get to it, I think, is that the cladding company said it won't catch fire. And if you're the council, you can say, look, they completely missold it to us. I mean, there is that. So, Pete, I think you would have a defence there, because they say, look, we've done all these fire safety tests, and it sailed through them.
Well, did they not go to did the council and the government not go to the fire section and say, have you tried it?
That's Gemma's point.
They're a big company.
Yeah, I know.
They're a big company.
So what you've got to do is you've got to do your own test on it. And that's where this lack of inspectors. I mean, this is partly about deregulation, Robert, isn't it? In the end, deregulation sounds great, but you've got BSE out of deregulation as well.
Well, I think what we need is not big regulation or small regulation. You need good regulation. And I think this is a lesson. I don't think people will be saying a bonfire of red tape anymore, bonfire.
Yeah, true.
God forbid. There is some over-regulation in some areas, but clearly... there was from what the report says, there was a culture which said, well, we've got to get rid of regulation. So therefore, we sign some things off that might not have been signed off otherwise, which is pretty horrific.
Rules, I'm starting to be in favour of regulation.
But but clearly they were lied to. These businesses were crooks. That's what the report says.
Yeah.
And they were lied to. And we had a school in my constituency, brand new, £35 million was spent on it. And 2 years later, it's got to be knocked down.
You're joking?
No. So they only found out because another school in Devon, built by the same company, had been built with faults. So they checked all the structural things, and if there had been a horrific weather or something, the school would have literally
Or it's
blown,
like the
blown
rack
away.
concrete thing.
No, this isn't
something
rack,
else.
It's a brand new school.
Wow.
2 years. And so, and I said, how on earth could this be signed off by surveyors and the health inspectors and the structural inspectors and goodness knows what, and yet this was all signed off. This whole school knocked down just after brand new, 2 years old.
Oh,
and the same company, and of course, what happened with the company? Declared themselves bankrupt.
Yeah, well, always.
So you can't get the people.
Pete, thank you. Paul is in Greater Manchester. Paul, do you think anyone will see justice here?
I don't see anyone being brought to justice as yet. But Jeremy, I do believe that there should have been an audit process to follow in the whole of this. I mean, the construction industry, it needs to be regulated firmly, and it starts from architects, main contractors, subcontractors, quantity surveyors, all who are looking to penny pinch, save rather than put the appropriate product up. I mean, the two companies that you've mentioned through your show, turning over 8 billion each as a turnover as a company, and when you have to have a test done, it probably costs the company around £200,000 per test. And I just think local authorities, renege on their responsibilities. Main contractors look for cheaper products. Companies who are bona fide and have paid to get these tests done, they're not being inspected properly, so that product can be used. And I mean, I deal with local authorities. I deal with main contractors, your tier ones, which are your biggest contractors, and everybody's, looking to change products at times because it's got to be value engineered, which is a dirty word in the industry. It's very, very hard. I really feel for the people on Grenfell, because I sell to architects cladding, and I make sure that the certification is there. Otherwise, I couldn't sell the product.
I'm going to thank you, Paul, because I just want to talk to Margaret, who's I know this is bringing back memories of your brother, Margaret, who died in a hospital fire.
Back in 1972, Jeremy, there was a hospital fire at a place called Cold Harbour in Sherborne, and 30 patients died as a result of cyanide being used in foam in furnishings. There was an inquiry, and it changed the furnishing industry. But my point really is that the legislation banning that foam inside the home should have gone further to the building industry and included being used on the outside of buildings as well. Because I understand there's a man who went down the stairwell and found dead bodies there. This would have been this gas produced by cyanide. So I think there is a case to answer there.
OK, Margaret, thank you very much. That's a good point. I remember in the 70s, people saying if your house catches fire, the biggest danger to you is your sofa, because they suddenly realised sofas were full of poison. I tell you what we'll do. Let's get some more calls on this, because there's lots of people waiting to talk about Grenfell. The reports come out, but will the police ever take action against the perpetrators? 020 7862 2222. Live on Channel 5 and live on My 5. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. We have Robert Halfon and Jemma Forte with us. We're talking to Grenfell. You wanted to say something, Jemma?
Well, I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about cutting red tape earlier on, because you're right, we had a lot of talk about bonfire red tape, didn't we, and cutting red tape. And if you replace that with cutting corners, often that's what you get. And in fact, the Conservative government, they removed the ability of trading standards inspectors to be able to do on-spec inspections. And they were warned that that could be really damaging, because if you've got 2 weeks' notice, you can get everything sorted out.
Regulation only ever increases in life generally.
Yeah.
So you do need to hack it back.
I mean, I was in a hotel recently, and they didn't clean the room, which is not a problem. I could just do it myself. I didn't mind. But I just said, what's the reason? They said, because you're leaving a Kindle on the bed. So, because obviously I'd fallen asleep reading my... I'm very serious.
Yes.
They were lovely, really lovely people who worked there. And because I was reading, falling asleep, leaving the Kindle on the bed, and I forgot about it in the morning. And they said that they can't touch it because of regulations.
Blimey. Yeah, well,
so you do get things like that are...
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because a friend of mine, day before yesterday, said he was in a hotel and he asked for a corkscrew to open the wine. They said, we can bring the corkscrew, we can't give it to you because it's sharp. we have to open the bottle of wine in the corridor and then pass it back through the door. And he's American, and he's saying this is great. So I'm not trivialising, I'm just saying there are sometimes regulations which go too far. The trouble is they've cut the wrong ones.
Yeah.
And we all agree on that. Dennis is in Portsmouth, a retired firefighter. You were watching, I'm guessing, with horror when this all unfolded, Dennis.
I certainly was, Jeremy, yes.
I felt very sorry for the individual firefighters because they were told to tell the residents to stay in.
Well, yes. The problem these days is that a lot of the control room staff, not like the old days, are not experienced firefighters. You know, the woman, the call handler, was only doing what they've been trained to do. They've probably never ever seen a fire themselves.
Well, that's interesting, but I don't know whether. Oh, I don't know what they're supposed to do. What do they say? Just run, if you say run for it and you end up people running into the fire, running downstairs. Well, it's what do we do, Des? Because in the end, it seems that high-rise blocks are inherently unstable. I mean, if you go to New York City, every single tall building has a ladder on the outside. But, I mean, that doesn't help you if the whole building's on fire, does it?
Well, there's no actual special equipment for firefighting in high-rise. Even long ladders are very limited use, you know. When you're in a high-rise fire, I've been in a couple of flat fires in Portsmouth, and you're in a completely different world. It can be quite terrifying. The communication is very, very difficult, and it's probable that Grenfell, that the first fire crews tackling the fire, had no idea that the fire had burst out the window. Then it was game over, you know?
Yeah. And it was a hot point fridge, and we gather that it was, was not obviously faulty, let's say, but where it started. But the fires will start, as you said, Robert, it's how you deal with them. Dennis, thank you for your wisdom there. OK, we'll move on to some completely different topics. This is what's coming up on the show.